just one name, and over all, Jesus reigns. I know. Nations bow, mountains shake at the sound of just one name. Over all, Jesus reigns. I know. There is a King of glory, there is a God who saves, one who is strong and mighty, freedom is in his name. So open the gates of heaven, lift up a shout of praise. There is a lion roaring, Jesus the King of glory. There is a lion roaring, Jesus the King of glory. One day when heaven was filled with his praises, one day when sin was as black as could be, Jesus came forth to be born of a virgin and dwelt among men. My example is he. The Word became flesh and the light shined among us. His glory revealed. Living he loved me, dying he saved me, buried he carried my sins far away, rising he justified freely forever. One day he's coming, oh glorious day, oh glorious day. One day they led him up Calvary's mountain. One day they nailed him to die on a tree. Suffering, anguish, despised and rejected, bearing our sins, my Redeemer is he. The hand that healed nations stretched out on a tree and took the nails from me. Living he loved me, dying he saved me, buried he carried my sins far away, rising he justified living he loved me, in dying he saved me, and buried he carried my sins far away. Rising he justified freely forever. One day he's coming, oh glorious day, oh glorious day, glorious day, oh glorious day.
Welcome. It's good to be with everyone today. It's good to see all you guys here, and it's good to not see but know that there are those of you out there watching us online. Thank you for watching us online. There are also those of you way up there watching us through the fog in the heights of a balcony. Thank you for being here. Thank you for those of you watching through that window. Appreciate you too. All of you guys, thank you so much for being with us today. It is such a privilege and such an exciting thing. And yet, at the same time, we have to shift gears and talk about a prophet who didn't really have the easiest of lives, and that's putting it mildly. We're going to continue this series we begun with the life of the prophet Jeremiah, and there's some key lessons here. And when you know, Jeremiah is a big, big book, and a lot of times I'm afraid it gets overlooked because it's such a big book. You can just kind of read, catch bits and pieces, but kind of snooze your way through the rest of it because there is a lot of repetition there. It is the second longest book in the Bible. It doesn't have the second most chapters, but it is actually the second longest book in the Bible. So it's a big book. Jeremiah was a prophet, powerful prophet, amazing prophet, called as a teenager, at least most likely. As far as we know, he was called by God to be a prophet as a teenager, and God warned him up front, hey, this is not going to be an easy ministry. I'm calling you now, but I'm letting you know you're not going to marry. Do not marry, do not have kids. Now, that's not a good sign. God is very in favor of marriage, so for him to say to a prophet, you're not going to marry, meant something very, very specific and very, very brutal. He's going to have a tough ministry, the kind of ministry where you don't want to have family to worry about at the same time. And for some 50 years, maybe even more than 50 years, Jeremiah plugged away, telling the people exactly what God wanted them to know, telling them the truth of God over and over and over again. And sometimes the people are like, oh yeah, Jeremiah, that's great. We'll do what God said. That's wonderful. And then other times they're like, no, we want nothing to do with this guy. As a matter of fact, we need to silence this guy. We need to shut this guy up. Attempts were made on Jeremiah's own life by his own people. God even revealed to him one part in the book, by the way, your own hometown, they're actually plotting to kill you. You don't know this, but you need to be aware of it. Talk about depressing. Now, I don't know about you, but if you ever feel like you're going through life and nobody's listening, well, you have a friend in Jeremiah. You have someone that can very well relate to you, right? He went through all this. People time and time and time again did not listen to him. And then he got to the end of his life. You know how his life ends? Well, we don't know for certain, but tradition tells us he was dragged away in a land that he didn't want to go to. God told them not to go to it in the first place, but the people didn't listen. They dragged him along for the ride. And then some 10, 20 years later, he was assassinated there by one of his own countrymen. Jeremiah is known to a lot of scholars and a lot of people as the weeping prophet. Why? Because after the book of Jeremiah, he writes the book of Lamentations, just like it sounds, lamenting. He is upset. He is distraught. He is sad because God's people rejected their God. The entire book is filled with this difficult time of a man trying to do what is right, and yet in the end it seemed like nothing worked out well for him. However, we know God pulled him through. This book can really bless you, especially if you feel like people aren't always listening. You feel like people aren't always making sense. They say that they're with you, but they're not. I would like to challenge you with a question, and I think this question, it's in the book of Jeremiah, the 17th chapter. These are the verses, Jeremiah 17, verses 5 through 13. We're going to read those verses in a bit, but this question could easily be used to summarize the entire book of Jeremiah, the entire ministry of Jeremiah, and it's a simple question. You go with God, or do you go with your gut? Do you go with God or do you go with your gut? And I realize that's kind of a brutal, maybe not brutal, but kind of a blunt way of saying it, right? But are you going to trust God or are you going to trust your instincts? Because Jeremiah found out in a big way that there are a lot of people who trust God and are with God, and so they were with Jeremiah in his ministry. But as soon as they felt like God was making them do something that they didn't really believe they should do or they didn't really want to do, then the trust for God wasn't so much there. It shifted to something else. See, in reality, so many people were going with their gut. And unfortunately, still to this day, and in this church right here, all of us are fighting this battle. We know God is true. Intellectually, we understand He's right, and what He says goes regardless of how I feel. But I have urges, I have instincts, I have desires that sometimes want to pull me away. Sometimes God doesn't seem like He's agreeing with me. What do I do then? You ever feel that struggle? You ever feel that tension? That's the very tension that Jeremiah had to fight with, and he is one of the few people that stuck with God when everyone else around him wasn't. So I want to say this pretty bluntly right now. Then we're going to read the verses, and we're going to say it again because I think this is so simple, and yet it is so vital in this day and age. So crucial that we get this down. We have a choice, and the choice is really simple. Do we go with God or do we go with our own instincts? If you go with your gut, if you go with your instincts, you're going to put your faith in humanity. You're going to put your faith in the circumstances, the people around you. You're going to put your faith in your heart. Whatever you feel is right, that's going to be the thing that you do. And you're going to put your faith in the happenings. Yeah, I needed another H word, sorry. It's the word for circumstances, right? What is happening around you, the situation. You're going to try to read the signs, and you're going to make a decision based on that. Going with your gut equals this kind of a thing. You trust humanity, you trust your heart, you trust the happenings around you. But if you go with God, you trust Him. And sometimes God happens to match up with your gut. Isn't that wonderful? Sometimes He doesn't. Regardless, if you're going with God, you're trusting Him, whether or not He happens to agree with your inclinations. So what's it going to be for us? That's the million-dollar question that Jeremiah was going through. And see if you don't see this. In Jeremiah chapter 17, we're going to start in the 5th verse and keep on reading here. Look at what this says. So powerful and so pointed. Verse 5, Jeremiah 17. This is what the Lord says. By the way, in your Bible, if Lord is in all caps, that's an indication that we're using the proper name, Yahweh, for God. Very, very specific. Yahweh, right? This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man. Now, I put it in brackets there because I think this is important to understand. That word for one is the Hebrew word Gibor. Gibor is the word translated mighty man or hero. We're not just talking about another man, another dude, another guy. No, this is a manly man. This is a mighty man. This is a tough guy. This is one of those people that do well in battle, or they do well, they're successful in life. This is the one you point to as the poster child for humanity or whatever, right? Mighty man. Doesn't matter how mighty you are. Cursed is the man who trusts in Adam. What is Adam? Adam. That's just the generic word used for mankind. That's how God made the first man, Adam, and Adam oftentimes just becomes a representation for humanity. It doesn't matter how mighty you are, it doesn't matter how strong or how bold you are, right? You could be the toughest guy ever, but if you put your trust in mankind, they're going to let you down. They're going to leave you high and dry. Who draws his strength? It says, cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws his strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. Listen, I'm so glad, well, I'm not so glad, but I think we're living at a time and age where we can understand this message very, very clearly. I can just go back all the way to 2019. way back, 2019. What was going on in 2019? I don't know what was going on for you. I know for me, I was sitting in meetings at church. We were talking about vision casting dreams for 2020. I wonder if we can come up with some really bold new idea and we could be like 2020 vision in 2020. Yeah, that's slick. Nah, that's a little too cheesy. You know, having these little debates about what's going to happen. But we're on top of the world, so it seemed. Life was great. People were thriving. Life was just going to get better and better and better. And then COVID hits at the beginning of 2020. In a matter of weeks, all of a sudden the world falls apart and we can't even get toilet paper anymore. I am walking to church offering to give toilet paper to first-time visitors because I know they need it. How do we go from being on top of the world and then in a matter of weeks we can't even take care of wiping anymore? That's what happens when you put your faith in humanity. If we can't learn from what's gone on in the last several months, we're just never going to get it, right? Humanity will leave you high and dry. Look at how Jeremiah explains it, how God explains it through Jeremiah. That person will be like a bush in the wastelands. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. It's like taking a bush, a live, growing bush, and planting it in a place where there's no water, there's no nutrients, there's no nothing. And that's fine, right? Because this bush is alive and it is a self-sustaining bush. That's how bushes work. We plant them and they just sustain themselves. No. Why do you think humanity is any different? Oh, we can just look to ourselves to solve our own problems and we're going to work out just fine. It's no different than planting a bush in the middle of a barren wasteland, a desert. It will not grow. Eventually it will die. Now see the contrast here. Verse 7. But blessed is the one who trusts in Yahweh, trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. This is a beautiful picture. It's not just used here in Jeremiah. You go to the book of Psalms, the very first chapter of the book of Psalms talks about this same imagery. You take that plant and you plant it where? Close to a stream. Why? Because the water source from the stream will always make sure that there's enough water, there's enough nutrients for this thing to grow. Doesn't matter what the weather's like. Doesn't matter how bad things get. You want a great example of this that everyone knew it in the ancient world? We should still know it today. You go to Egypt. You don't actually have to go to Egypt, but just take my word for this here. If it weren't for that river, what's that big river in Egypt? Yeah. If it weren't for that Nile, there would be no Egypt. An entire powerful nation survives. Why? Because they've got that river to provide what they need to nurture everything, and a whole powerhouse of a nation that dominated ancient history is there. Why? Because of the river. The ancient people understand this, right? You are not going to make it on your own, but if you trust the Lord, it's like a tree. You're planted by Him. He's going to be able to sustain you no matter what happens. But look where Jeremiah goes. Look where he goes next. Verse 9, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? I can only think of one that can understand it, and here he is. I, the Lord, search the heart. I examine the mind. Hebrew word there is actually the word for kidneys. Funny enough, it's your instincts, your emotions. A lot of times you feel fear, you feel distress or whatever, you feel it in the pit of your stomach first, right? That's the idea. I examine your innermost thoughts, your feelings, your inclinations, to reward each person according to how they feel? No, not according to how they feel. According to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. See, sooner or later, even your heart, even your emotions will deceive you. Now, if you've been going to this church for any length of time, you've probably heard this mentioned already. And sometimes it bothers me a little bit. I feel bad about it because when you talk about something too much, people think you're just obsessed with something. You're just over the top on something. I really am not. I don't think I'm all that obsessed with talking about your heart being deceptive. So why do I talk about it so much? I think it's our culture that is completely obsessed the other way. I think the world in which we live is very much a follow your heart kind of world. They've just assumed that this is the way you're supposed to live. But all throughout the Bible, all throughout the book of Jeremiah, And especially right here, he says, you got to be careful. Your heart, I'm not saying your heart's evil. It's not. It's very good many times. It's got a purpose, and we're going to talk about that. But it can deceive you if you let it be your guide. It's deceitful. Verse 11 says something that's kind of difficult to translate, but I think the idea comes across. Like a partridge that hatches eggs it did not lay are those who gain riches by unjust means. When their lives are half gone, their riches will desert them, and in the end, they will prove to be fools. Now, it's difficult. Your translation may say something a little bit different, but I think the idea is clear. If you look to the circumstances, if you look to what you would expect would happen based on what is going on around you. Oh, this bird hatches eggs. Okay, that makes sense. Wait, it didn't lay the eggs. What? I'm all thrown off. That's not how, this is how life works. If you look to what happens, if you look to the circumstances and think, therefore I can forecast what the safe choice is, many times you might feel like that's a good way to go, but sometimes you'll find, sooner or later, you'll discover you'll be deceived. You'll be tricked. There are things that none of us see coming, and the circumstances around us do not always match. Just because someone's blessed doesn't mean they're obeying God. Just because someone like Jeremiah sure looks like he's cursed, man, it sure looks like he lived a waste of a life, doesn't mean he was disobeying God. No, he was honoring God. See, if you look to your circumstances, they are deceptive as well. So who do we look to? Well, verse 12, a glorious throne exalted from the sanctuary, from the beginning, is the place of our sanctuary. Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water. Now, your translation may say something different. The NIV says written in the dust. The idea you write something down in the dust and then wind comes and what happens to it? Whoosh, it's gone. It's not there. Other translations think, well, no, this is written down. Well, the meaning's the same. We write you down in a record. Why? Because we're going to punish you. We're going to deal with what you've done. You've put your trust in something else other than God. That's not okay, and we're going to remember it to deal with it. Either way, the end result is the same, right? God is where your trust goes. Any other place, and you missed it. So, what's it going to be? Do you go with your gut? If you go with your gut, you're going to look to humanity. You're going to look to your heart. And you're going to look to what happens around you and try to make the best decision you know how. Or do you just look to God and do you trust Him? Even though He may not always match up with these other things. That's the million-dollar question of the book of Jeremiah, but it's also the question that we still need to wrestle with to this day. And just because you already answered that a long time ago does not mean you don't need to reopen that question and think clearly about it again, because life happens. Life happens, distractions take place, and sooner or later, it's like my gut. You look down and it's different. It's not the way it was before. Why did this happen? I just blinked and life does that to you in so many different ways, and in your faith, the same thing can happen. So today, I really hope you'll pause with me and think, well, wait a minute, I think I know the answer, but what am I doing? Am I going with God, or am I really trusting my own instincts here? Take a look at this bridge. This is the Broughton Suspension Bridge. The Broughton Suspension Bridge was the first of its kind in Europe, as I understand it. They built it in London, or at least near London, and this would be the year 1826. Yeah, 1826. And it's a really cool, cool concept. One of the first of its kind suspension bridges. So you've got these cables and stuff holding this entire bridge up. It is suspended in the air. What a concept. What a feat of engineering, right? This thing held pretty strong for the next 5 years, but then a group of soldiers, 74 of them marching in unison, marched across this bridge, the Broughton Bridge, and it collapsed. Yeah, it collapsed. Fast forward. This is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, built July 1st, 1940. Some of you might recognize this. You can find videos of it on YouTube. It received a nickname. It was called Galloping Gertie. Galloping Gertie. Why? Because it was a huge suspension bridge. Massive suspension bridge. And because it was a suspension bridge, it had a little bit of a wobble to it, but that's the way it was supposed to be. Built 1940, they used 81 million pounds of concrete. 6 million pounds of rebar, 2.9 million pounds of reinforced steel, And by today's dollars, we're looking at almost $1 billion. That's 1,000 sets of $1 million to build this massive suspension bridge. Pretty impressive. But only 4 months later, November 7th, 1940, there happened to be a camera crew nearby to film what took place. And when you go on YouTube, you can see what happened to Galloping Gertie. Didn't last. Only 4 months later. Fast forward again, January 5th, 2011, 39-story skyscraper in Seoul, South Korea. This building, I believe, was called the Techno Mart. And the funny thing about that name is this building shook. On this particular day, it shook violently for about 10 minutes. It shook so bad that some people on the upper floors, whole floors were being evacuated. They were panicked. They didn't know what was going on. They thought it was an earthquake. But when they got down to the bottom, they realized there is no earthquake going on, but this building is shaking violently. What is going on here? Interesting thing, the building was actually built to withstand a magnitude 7 earthquake. So it's weird that this would be going on. So weird, in fact, that the experts decided we need to shut this building down entirely. They evacuated the whole thing, and for the next 3 days, experts studied trying to figure out what caused this building, this 39-story skyscraper, to shake so violently that people knew they had to get out of there. Well, it's interesting. It's the same thing that caused the Broughton Bridge in the early 1800s to collapse. And it's the same thing that caused what you just saw with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge to buckle, and it also collapsed. It's this little phenomenon called resonance. Resonance. Now, I bet you've heard that term before. At least you've heard the expression, oh, that really resonates with me, right? Oh, yeah, that resonates. That affects me. Resonance is a really cool concept if you think about it, and I'm terrible at explaining it. I'm just terrible at it. I think I wrote myself a note to help me understand this a little bit better. But if I had to attempt to explain it, resonance is this idea when an external force comes and it interacts with what's on the inside. As I understand it, objects tend to have their own point at which they vibrate, right? There tends to be a certain frequency or whatever by which, like this podium or this stage or whatever, would tend to vibrate. Now, if there's an outside force that happens to match that frequency, then you get resonance. You get a maximum amount of, a bigger amount of vibration. So here's my stupid illustration, right? And Willie will explain it better when this is all over. Thanks, Willie. But you're pushing a kid on the swing. Remember the little kid? You're like, push me, come on, push me. Okay, fine, I'll push you. You know, wee, higher, push me higher, right? You've been through this, right? Yeah. So you push the kid. How do you push the kid? Well, we, especially the older we are, right, the older adults we are, we have learned how to push a child while maintaining the most amount of energy for ourselves. We don't want to waste all our strength on this kid, so we try to push him or her without exerting too much energy. So how do we do that? You push, and then you wait for them to come back. And when they hit just that right spot, you push again, whee, and then they wait for them to come back. And you push again, right? You don't say, okay, kid, I'll push you. You don't do that. You match the pace of their swing. Why? Because you don't want to wear out your arms. You would rather push and get the maximum effect. It's kind of like resonance, right? You push right where you can get the maximum amount of impact. So, how did the Broughton Bridge collapse in the early 1800s? Well, 74 troops marching together in unison at just the right pace caused the resonance of this bridge to shake it violently enough that it collapsed. Interesting thing I discovered about this is evidently Mythbusters did something some years ago where they tried to disprove this, but then after that episode aired, this was one of their few retractions where they actually went back and retracted it and basically said, yeah, it might have happened this way. It's also my understanding that there are some bridges now in that area that have signs on them that say you must, something to the effect of break step when crossing this bridge. In other words, we don't want a whole bunch of people walking together in unison across this bridge. You need to break your step so we don't have this resonance problem, right? How did this crazy thing happen in the Tacoma Narrows Bridge? Well, 4 months after they built this massive superstructure, all this money, all this stuff, They didn't count on the fact that the wind would be blowing at just the right angle and at just the right speed to match the resonance of this bridge, to the point where it ribboned, it violently shook so much that it buckled and it could not collapse anymore. So, what caused a 39-story skyscraper over in Seoul, South Korea to shake so much that they had to evacuate the building for 3 days while they figured out what was going on? Well, I've asked the sound team to play the song. Will you play the song that caused it? You remember that? You remember that song? That did it. The experts looked at it, and what they concluded, there happened to be, I believe it was on the 19th floor, 17 middle-aged people in a Taibo class. 17 middle-aged people doing their Taibo exercise to that song, I've Got the Power, trying to burn off some belly fat, match the resonance frequency of this building, shook some of the upper floors so bad that they had to evacuate the whole building to figure out what was going on. Now, why am I going crazy about resonance? Why would I make such a big deal about this silly little phenomenon? Because I think God has given us a picture of our heart. I really, really think God has given us a way to understand exactly what's going on in here. Why does he say these strange things about the heart being deceptive, the heart being deceitful? The heart is where you resonate. It is where you shake to your core. I've seen this happen time and time again. It has happened in my own life. I'm sure it's happened in yours. Your heart was stirred. Something happened. Something resonated with you. Your heart was stirred and you were shaken into action. And sometimes people will do the craziest things, right? People do the craziest things. I've seen it happen in terrible ways. I've seen people who know God, who love Christ so much, and yet they walk away from it. They go after some silly relationship or something. Why? Because their heart was just shaken. They were shaken to their core. They just couldn't handle it, and they go for it. Other people, it's the exact opposite. Some people leave behind old bad ways or whatever because something shakes their heart, it gets a grip on them, and they move in a different direction. This is where we resonate. But you know how resonating works, right? It's where an outside source comes and interacts with what's inside. That's huge. If you try to look to your heart for guidance, you are looking to the wrong place. Why? Because it is only going to interact with what is outside, and it comes in and resonates. It's like when you were a kid. You remember when you were a kid and you went to that big building, or maybe it was that outdoor scenery or that vacant place or whatever, and you shouted and you heard the echo. Hello? 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 Anybody there? Anybody there? Anybody there? Remember that? You remember when that happened? Now, be honest, okay? Do you remember the time when you were so young that you actually thought there was someone out there yelling back at you? Yeah, okay, thank you for being honest. I know it happened to you guys, right? I know. There was a time in your life where you yelled and you heard the voice coming right back at you, and you're like, I think there's somebody out there trying to copy everything I say. You were suspicious. Well, listen. Wouldn't it actually be sad? Wouldn't it be tragic if you grew up and spent your whole life searching, trying to find that guy who copies you every time you yell in that building? Wouldn't that be a disaster? Why? Because it's an echo. There is no guy out there copying you. It's you causing it. You just didn't even realize. You're looking in the wrong place. That's a lot like trying to follow your heart. Your heart is so powerful. It is where you can be stirred to do some of the greatest or worst, the craziest of things, but it needs a guide. Your heart it must have a guide. So the real question today is this: what's guiding your heart? What is it out there that you are allowing to come in and cause your heart to resonate? with. This is why Psalm 119:11 says, I have hidden your word. But where? Where? I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. The word out there comes in the heart. How can we guide this powerful, volatile heart that God has allowed us to have? Well, all through the Bible, you're going to find ways, but I just want to throw out 3 of them real quickly. 3 ways that I believe you look to what Scripture says and you see doing these things can actually guide, can actually mold and shape your heart. How do you guide your heart? 3 simple things. Say it, pray it, pay it. Super simple, right? Not easy. I didn't say easy. I said simple. Say it, pray it, pay it. Say it. Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The entire chapter of James 3 talks about how your mouth is untamed. Your tongue says whatever it's going to say. Why? Because it is connected to you on the inside. It is connected to your heart. If people talk enough, sooner or later they betray what's on the inside. It just leaks out, whether you want it to or not. I've seen it happen so many times. Happens in my own life. I think I've got a pure heart, and then something flies out my mouth. Oh boy, not what I thought, right? Your heart and your mouth, they're connected, and so pay attention to what you say because you have a direct link back to your heart. Don't ignore what you say. Don't say, oh, that's not me, that's just my mouth or whatever. No, pay attention to it because the words that you say, I believe, really do have a trickle-back effect. They can begin to mold who you are on the inside. Pray it. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now, Jesus, hold on a second. Love your enemies. Enemies are by definition the unloved ones, right? Isn't that what an enemy is? Someone that you despise, someone against you, an opponent, a foe. You don't love your enemies. How on earth could I love an enemy? Well, Jesus tells us how. Pray for them. You want to love them? Well, pray for them. Sooner or later, you figure out it's very hard to hate someone that you keep on praying for. It's actually pretty hard to not start to love somebody when you keep on over and over praying for them. Pay it. Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It doesn't say that in reverse. It doesn't say, well, your heart's there, so therefore your treasure is going to follow suit. You'll eventually give money. No. It says it the other way around. It says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is a powerful and dramatic point. If you spend money on something, your heart's there too. I mean, follow this, right? It could be crazy. I could spend tons and tons and tons of money on car parts. Well, guess where my heart is? Something to do with these car parts, right? I could spend it on washing machines. I could just amass all these washing machines, spend all my money on washing machines. Well, guess what? Apparently, sooner or later, I have a heart for washing machines. You can pay your money wherever, but your heart follows suit. God's giving us a secret here, a powerful one that we can use to our advantage. You want to train your heart? You want to guide your heart to the right place? Look at your money. Where your money is going, there your heart's going too. So, I know it's an old question. I know it's one you've heard before and you've probably felt like you've dealt with it before, but I would like to ask today, would you please think carefully about it again? In light of all the changes in the world, in light of all the shaking that's happened around us, in light of all the unrest and the uncertainty, can we go back to the basic question? Am I going with my gut? Or am I going with God? Before we take off today, I just want to remind everyone about something coming up. November the 22nd. It's a Sunday. We're going to have a Thanksgiving appreciation meal following services. It's going to be some good food, but in particular, this is a chance that we get to appreciate those who have volunteered and those who are new to the church, to Brevard Christian. So if you fall into either of those categories, which is just about everyone around here, which is great, probably everyone watching too, this is for you. We would love to have you. New members, new people who've come to our church, and also people who've put in work. We appreciate all that you've done, and we just want a chance to say that. And so November 22nd is going to be the time for that. You are invited to that. And if you have been watching us online, there are some of you, and I want to say this hopefully in the right way. I sure hope I don't say it in the wrong way, but there are some of you that, it sounds bad when I say some of you. Oh well, I'm committed. We miss you. We kind of miss you. If you're looking for a day to come back, I know there's so much uncertainty in the world, and we definitely want to be careful. By the way, this whole idea of social distancing, big misnomer. Physical distancing. Physical distancing is what we should be doing. Social distancing is a terrible idea. It's not good for man to be alone. And we hope, if you're not with us, that you haven't felt too alone, but if you have been thinking about a day in which to come back, we'd love to invite you on the 22nd. Because for a number of us, yeah, we do miss you. But we appreciate you plugging away and doing what's best. And thank you for all your prayers and support for God's work here in this county. We just can't wait to see what God's going to continue to do. But November 22nd, after services, that will be a great time. We'd love to invite you to come back. We'd love to invite all of you here, you in the balcony, to join us as well for this appreciation meal. Before we are dismissed entirely to go about the rest of our day, I want to just say one prayer for us, and then we'll take off, okay? So would you bow with me in prayer? God, I know the message is so simple, but yet it's amazing how complicated the enemy can make our lives. I know it's incredible. The simplest of decisions, whether we go with our instincts or go with you, can just be so puzzling in our heads when we have all these variables and all these things. But God, I just hope and pray that today you've reminded us that there are some things that really only you should be worrying about. God, you're the one that has the brain big enough to process all this stuff going on that we don't fully understand, and we humble ourselves to that fact. So God, right now, we ask that in our effort to show our humility, that we just follow you, regardless of the outside circumstances or even the internal ones deep in the pit of our stomach, God. Whatever it is, please let that take second place to what you have for each of us. And I pray that we see that change start to take place even today. God, remind us of what we say. Remind us of the things that we pray for and the things that we spend money on, so that our heart can be after you. I ask this in your Son's name.